The battlefield of Vexus 4 was a graveyard of shattered war machines and fallen soldiers, the once thriving colony world now reduced to a wasteland of smoke and fire. The Galactic Coalition's forces had fought desperately, but they were losing ground with every passing hour. The Tsalvoth Empire, a ruthless race of reptilian conquerors, had crushed resistance on every front, their towering war machines and relentless infantry advancing without mercy. The planetary defense shield, the last barrier protecting the remaining coalition forces, was flickering, struggling to hold against the relentless bombardment from orbit. Inside the underground command bunker, General Elric stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the holomap before him. Red markers, representing enemy forces, swarmed across the display, overwhelming the scattered blue markers that symbolized the last of his troops. His officers spoke in hushed, fearful tones, but he already knew the truth. This battle was lost. The Tsalvoth had breached the outer defenses, their shock troopers pouring into the final coalition stronghold. The evacuation ships were too few, and the wounded too many. Even if they managed to escape, there was nowhere left to run. Outside, the coalition soldiers fought with everything they had, but morale was shattered. Their weapons were overheating, their energy shields failing, and the endless tide of enemy warriors gave them no chance to regroup. The Tsalvoth advanced with terrifying precision, their reptilian faces twisted into cruel grins as they closed in for the kill. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched flesh, the ground littered with the bodies of the fallen. In the skies above, the Tsalvoth fleet loomed like a monstrous storm, their dreadnoughts casting long shadows over the ruined landscape. Artillery fire rained down, turning strongholds into rubble, and every explosion sent shockwaves through the ground. The coalition had always known this war was a losing battle, but they had hoped, desperately, that they could hold out long enough for reinforcements. Now it was clear. No help was coming. They were alone, surrounded, and moments away from total annihilation. Then, through the chaos and destruction, something changed. The warning alarms in the command bunker blared, signaling an unidentified object entering the planet's atmosphere. Elric turned sharply to his officers, expecting to hear the worst. Another Tsalvoth weapon, another superweapon unleashed upon his already broken forces. But the readings were strange. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't an escape pod from one of their own ships. It was a drop pod, a single human drop pod. The Coalition had long heard stories of the humans, warriors from the distant Sol Empire, a species that had kept to their own corner of the galaxy. They were rumored to be dangerous, unpredictable, and utterly fearless in battle. But there were no records of human involvement in this war, no reason why a single one of them would come crashing down into a battle they had no part in. The pod burned through the sky like a falling comet, its outer shell glowing red-hot as it plummeted straight into the heart of the battlefield. Coalition and Tsalvoth alike turned their eyes upward, watching in disbelief as the small metal capsule slammed into the ground with a thunderous impact, sending a shockwave rippling through the surrounding area. For a moment, everything was still. The dust and smoke from the impact swirled in the air, obscuring the pod from view. The Tsalvoth warriors hesitated, their weapons raised, their reptilian eyes narrowing in suspicion. Then, with a mechanical hiss, the pod's hatch burst open. From within the wreckage, a single figure emerged. Clad in battle-scarred armor, a towering human soldier stepped onto the war-torn battlefield. His visor glowed with an eerie blue light, and in his hands, he carried a weapon unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. His movements were precise, controlled, like a predator assessing its prey. The Tsalvoth, always arrogant in their belief of superiority, laughed at the sight of a lone warrior facing their entire army. To them, this was nothing more than a fool's last stand, another body to add to the piles of the dead. But before they could react, the human moved. It was like nothing the Coalition soldiers had ever witnessed. One moment, the human stood motionless, and the next, he was a blur of destruction. Plasma rounds erupted from his weapon, cutting through salvo armor like it was paper. He weaved through enemy fire with impossible speed, dodging, countering, striking with brutal efficiency. His fists shattered skulls, his blade carved through the thickest armor, and his sheer presence turned the battlefield into chaos. The Salvoth roared in fury, rallying their forces, but it didn't matter. The lone human tore through their ranks with the precision of a machine and the fury of a warrior who had nothing to lose. Coalition soldiers, battered and near defeat, watched in shock as their enemy, the monstrous, unstoppable Salvoth, began to falter. For the first time in this war, the invaders hesitated. The single human had done something no army had managed before. He had broken the Salvoth's confidence. General Elric, still watching from the command bunker, felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The war wasn't over yet, not as long as that soldier was still standing. The battlefield was silent for a moment, as if the entire war had paused to witness the impossible. The single human drop pod had crashed into the war-torn plains of Vexus 4, right in the middle of the blood-soaked no-man's land between the last remaining coalition stronghold and the advancing Salvoth forces. Smoke and dust billowed into the sky, the impact leaving a deep crater in the scorched earth. Soldiers on both sides stared at the wreckage in disbelief. The Salvoth warriors, towering reptilian creatures with thick armor-like scales and sharp claws, exchanged confused glances, their weapons raised but uncertain. They had never seen anything like this. The coalition forces, battered and exhausted, could barely comprehend what had just happened. For days, they had fought knowing their end was near, outnumbered and overwhelmed. And yet, in the moment of their greatest despair, a single human soldier had descended from the skies like a vengeful ghost. The Salvoth commander, a hulking brute covered in battle scars, snarled in annoyance. To him, this was nothing more than a minor distraction. Perhaps it was some foolish attempt by the coalition to send reinforcements, though one soldier was hardly worth the effort. He barked an order in his guttural language, and a squad of Salvoth shock troopers moved in cautiously, their massive plasma rifles aimed at the impact site. The dust was still settling, but something inside the pod was moving. A metallic hiss cut through the silence as the reinforced hatch burst open, the heavy door flying outward with unnatural force. A figure emerged from within, stepping onto the battlefield with a slow, deliberate motion. The human was clad in advanced battle armor, its black plating gleaming under the eerie glow of the burning sky. His helmet's visor, a single strip of glowing blue light, revealed no expression, no fear, only cold, calculating intent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The Salvoth warriors stood frozen, their weapons trained on the lone human, their reptilian instincts warning them that something was terribly wrong. The coalition soldiers, too exhausted to even cheer, simply watched, waiting for the inevitable slaughter. They had heard of human warriors before, stories whispered in distant outposts, tales of their unpredictable tactics and unnatural resilience. But no one had ever seen one in action. Until now, the human raised his weapon, a sleek, deadly rifle unlike anything the coalition had ever designed. Before the Salvoth could react, the battlefield was drowning in fire and death. The coalition's defenses had crumbled under the sheer force of the Salvoth Empire, and their once proud armies now lay in ruins. The skies above Vexus 4 were blackened with smoke, filled with the thunder of warships unleashing devastation upon the last remnants of resistance. The Salvoth warriors, towering reptilian brutes with hardened scales and merciless eyes, moved through the rubble like predators hunting their dying prey. Their massive war machines crushed everything in their path, leaving only ash and broken bodies in their wake. The last survivors of the coalition were trapped in a desperate fight, their backs against the walls of the final command center, knowing that surrender was not an option. Their ammunition was running low, their defenses had been breached, and their leaders had fallen one by one. Defeat was no longer a possibility. It was an undeniable reality. But then, something changed. A single drop pod, black as the void and reinforced beyond standard military design, tore through the sky like a falling comet. It crashed into the heart of the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the ground. Dust and debris exploded outward as the impact crater formed, momentarily silencing even the Salvath invaders. Their reptilian eyes narrowed, their instincts warning them of something unnatural. The coalition soldiers, battered and barely holding on, could only watch in disbelief. A single drop pod. Reinforcements at this stage of the battle were impossible. There were no more fleets, no more armies coming to save them. So who, or what, had just arrived? The silence was broken by a sharp hiss as the pod's reinforced door blasted open. A figure stepped out, clad in midnight black armor, the plates reinforced with energy shielding that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. The helmet's visor concealed the face beneath, but the stance, the slow and deliberate movement, radiated nothing but cold precision. A rifle, unlike anything the Coalition had ever designed, rested in the figure's hands, its edges glowing faintly with barely contained power. The Xalvoth recognized the threat instantly. A human, but not just any human. A soldier unlike the rest, a warrior forged for war itself. The first Salvath soldier lunged, its massive frame moving with terrifying speed. Its plasma rifle fired a barrage of searing energy bolts, but before the shots could land, the human moved. Faster than the eye could track, he dodged to the side, his own weapon firing a single, precise shot. The energy round struck the Salvath's thick skull, piercing through its hardened scales as if they were paper. The creature collapsed instantly, its massive body hitting the ground with a dull thud. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The Salvath forces, confused but enraged, turned their weapons on the lone warrior. Plasma bolts and explosives rained down upon him, but he didn't fall. He weaved through the onslaught with inhuman reflexes, each movement calculated, each step part of an unstoppable advance. Every shot from his rifle found its mark, dropping enemy after enemy with ruthless efficiency. The Coalition soldiers watched in stunned silence. They had fought for days, for weeks, struggling to survive against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. And now, one person was cutting through the Xalvoth, ranks like a force of nature. Hope, a feeling long forgotten, flickered in their hearts. They picked up their weapons, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they fought back with renewed determination. Inspired by the warrior in black armor, they pushed forward, striking down the enemy with a ferocity they hadn't known they possessed. The Xalvoth commander, a towering beast covered in battle scars, roared in fury. He had seen humans fight before, reckless, emotional, weak in the face of superior strength. But this one was different. This one fought without hesitation, without wasted movement, as if war itself was part of his very being. This was not a soldier. This was a weapon. The commander knew that if this lone warrior was not stopped, his entire army would fall apart. With a guttural growl, he activated his personal energy blades, twin weapons that could slice through even the thickest armor. If his troops could not stop the human, then he would do it himself. The warrior saw the challenge and did not hesitate. As the battlefield burned around them, as soldiers clashed in the background, the two warriors faced each other. One, a monstrous conqueror, wielding strength and brutality. The other, a lone human, standing against an entire army with nothing but his skill, his weapon, and an unbreakable will. The duel began, and the fate of the battle hung in the balance. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered metal and fallen soldiers. Smoke rose from the craters where explosives had torn the ground apart, and the sky was darkened by the wreckage of destroyed warships. The Salvath Empire had believed victory was inevitable. They had crushed the Coalition's forces, broken their lines, and driven them to the edge of extinction. But now, the impossible was happening. The arrival of a single human warrior had changed everything. The Coalition soldiers, who had once fought only to delay the inevitable, were now pushing forward with newfound strength. Their weapons, once held in trembling hands, now fired with unrelenting fury. The fear that had paralyzed them had been replaced by something even more powerful: hope. And at the center of it all, the lone soldier moved like a storm. The Tsalvoth warriors, towering beasts of muscle and armor, had always believed themselves superior in strength and numbers. But against this human, their advantage meant nothing. He moved too fast, struck too hard, and never hesitated. Plasma bolts flew past him, but he was already gone before they could land. He weaved through the enemy ranks, his rifle taking down one salvo after another with merciless precision. His armor, reinforced with experimental shielding, absorbed what little damage managed to break through his defenses. Every strike, every movement, was executed with terrifying efficiency. The Tsalvoth commander watched the battle unfold with growing rage. This was not how it was supposed to go. The coalition was supposed to be finished. This planet was supposed to be theirs, and yet, a single human had turned the tide. His warriors, once unstoppable, were now struggling against an enemy they had already defeated. The commander's massive hands tightened around the hilt of his energy blades, their edges glowing with a burning blue light. If his soldiers could not stop this human, then he would. With a roar that shook the battlefield, the commander charged. The ground trembled beneath his steps, and the air cracked with the heat of his weapons. The human turned, meeting the Tsalvoth's furious gaze. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The battlefield faded into the background, and there was only the two of them, the monstrous warlord and the lone warrior. The Tsalvoth struck first, his energy blades slashing through the air with terrifying speed. But the human was faster. He dodged the first strike, then the second, his movements fluid and precise. The commander snarled, his attacks growing more aggressive, but no matter how fast he struck, he could not land a single blow. Then the human countered. His rifle fired at point-blank range, the energy blast slamming into the commander's shoulder, forcing the beast to stumble back. But the Tsalvoth was not so easily defeated. He roared in pain and rage, swinging his blade in a wide arc. The human barely evaded it, but the sheer force of the attack sent him skidding backward. The commander saw his chance. He lunged forward, determined to end the fight in one decisive strike. But that was exactly what the human had been waiting for. In a split second, the warrior twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the incoming blade. His free hand shot forward, grabbing onto the Tsalvoth's arm, using the beast's own momentum against him. With a brutal efficiency, he drove his rifle's barrel against the commander's chest and fired. The blast tore through armor and flesh, sending the Tsalvoth staggering backward. The warrior did not stop. He pressed forward, his attacks relentless. A second shot, a third, each one driving the monstrous warlord closer to the edge of collapse. The commander tried to strike back, but his movements were slowing, his strength fading. And then, with one final precise shot, the battle was over. The Tsalvoth commander fell, his massive body crashing to the ground. Silence spread across the battlefield as the remaining Tsalvoth warriors witnessed their leader's defeat. For the first time, fear entered their minds. The unstoppable force they had believed themselves to be was no longer invincible. The lone warrior stood over the fallen warlord, his weapon still raised, his stance unwavering. The message was clear. This war was not over, and humanity was not so easily broken. The coalition soldiers, once on the brink of death, now surged forward with renewed fury. Their battle cries echoed across the ruins as they drove the Tsalvoth back. The tide had turned. Victory, once nothing more than a distant dream, was now within reach. And at the heart of it all, the lone warrior continued to fight, a symbol of defiance, a living reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could change the course of history. The battlefield was a graveyard of twisted metal, burning wreckage, and fallen warriors. Smoke and ash filled the air as the remnants of the coalition forces struggled to hold their last line of defense. The Tsalvoth Empire, brutal and merciless, had crushed every resistance in their path, leaving nothing but destruction behind. The coalition had fought desperately, but their weapons were failing, their soldiers exhausted, and their hopes slipping away like sand through their fingers. The Xalvoth war machines moved forward without mercy, their monstrous warriors tearing through the last defenders. It was clear the war was lost. But then, something happened that no one had expected. A single human drop pod broke through the atmosphere, cutting through the storm of enemy fire like a meteor, crashing into the heart of the battlefield with a force that shook the ground. The Xalvoth, arrogant in their victory, barely paid it any attention. One soldier, one last attempt. What difference could it make? But they were about to learn a lesson that would be spoken about for generations. The door of the drop pod exploded outward, and from the smoke, a single figure emerged. Clad in reinforced battle armor, his silhouette was sharp against the flames behind him. His rifle was gripped tight, his stance unwavering. He moved with a purpose, walking straight into the battlefield, as if death itself had no claim on him. The Xalvoth laughed at first. The lone human. It was almost insulting. They raised their weapons, confident that this fight would last mere seconds. But they were wrong. The first shot came so fast that they barely saw it. One Xalvoth warrior fell, then another. The lone soldier moved like a ghost, his rifle never missing a target. He weaved through enemy fire with unnatural speed. Every movement precise, every attack devastating. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, but none found their mark. The Xalvoth had always believed humans were weak, fragile creatures. But today, they learned the truth. The coalition soldiers, half dead and ready to surrender moments ago, could only watch in stunned silence. They had fought alongside humans before, but never had they seen anything like this. The lone warrior was not just fighting. He was destroying the enemy. He moved too fast, his strikes too efficient. He tore through the Xalvoth lines, leaving behind a trail of devastation. The beasts, once so confident in their dominance, were now hesitating. Fear crept into their ranks. The humans were supposed to be weak. This was not weakness. This was something else. This was a nightmare given form. The Xalvoth warlord finally realized the danger. With a roar, he signaled his elite guards to attack. They were larger, stronger, faster than the average soldier, their armor thick, their weapons deadly. They had never been defeated. They surrounded the lone warrior, their blades humming with energy, their eyes burning with fury. The warlord stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the battlefield. "You fight well, human," he growled, his voice like thunder. "But this is where it ends." The warrior did not speak. He did not hesitate. He moved. The first guard lunged, his blade slicing through the air. The human ducked, spinning around in one fluid motion. His rifle fired once, twice, both shots finding their mark. The guard fell before he could even react. The second and third attacked together, their strikes coordinated. The warrior twisted, his movements impossibly fast. One was disarmed in an instant, his weapon ripped from his grasp, and turned against him. The other barely had time to react before a precise shot ended his charge. The remaining guards hesitated. The warlord growled in frustration. "Cowards! Kill him!" But they were already dead before they could obey. The warrior closed the distance in the blink of an eye, his blade flashing as it carved through armor and flesh alike. The battlefield was silent for a moment as the last body hit the ground. The warlord's eyes narrowed. He was the last one standing. He was the strongest warrior of the Xalvoth Empire. He had conquered worlds, crushed armies, bathed in the blood of his enemies. But as he looked into the human's cold, unyielding eyes, he felt something he had never felt before. Fear. With a furious roar, the warlord charged. His massive blade swung with enough force to cleave a tank in half. But the human was already moving. He sidestepped at the last possible moment, his rifle snapping up. 3 shots rang out. The warlord stumbled, but he did not fall. He growled, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You think you can kill me so easily?" he snarled. "I am the greatest warrior of my kind." The human finally spoke. "Not anymore." In a single decisive motion, the warrior fired one last shot. It was not a wild blast, not a desperate attack. It was precise, calculated, aimed at the warlord's only weak point. That Salvath froze, his eyes widening in disbelief as the energy bolt tore through his armor. He staggered back, his weapon slipping from his grasp. And then, with a final, gasping breath, he fell. The battlefield was silent. The remaining Salvath soldiers, seeing their leader dead, did not wait to fight. They turned and ran. The coalition forces, still struggling to believe what they had just witnessed, finally found their voices. A roar of victory erupted across the battlefield. The war was not over. The enemy was not invincible. And it was all because of one man. As the warrior stood among the wreckage, his armor scorched, his rifle still smoking, the soldiers around him began to whisper. His name, his story would be told for years to come. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something more. A legend. And legends never die.